We begin in Washington, where Attorney General Merrick Garland has appointed a special counsel to investigate classified materials President Biden retained from his time as vice president. The special counsel is Robert Hur. He's the former top federal prosecutor in Maryland. He will be in charge of overseeing a review of documents found at the president's former office at a Washington think tank and in the garage at his Wilmington home in Delaware. Adriana Diaz has more details from Washington.
Earlier today, I signed an order appointing Robert Hur as special counsel.
Today, Attorney General Merrick Garland tapped Robert Hur, a veteran prosecutor who served under former President Trump, to investigate the possible unauthorized removal and retention of classified documents. The stunning announcement came just hours after the White House admitted that a small number of classified documents had been found in the garage of President Biden's Wilmington residence and in a room next door.
So the material was in a locked garage?
Yes, as well as my Corvette. But as I said earlier this week, people know I take classified documents and classified materials seriously.
The latest revelation follows Monday's admission by the White House after questioning by CBS News that Mr. Biden's lawyers had found 10 classified documents in this building, roughly a mile from the White House, where Biden once had an office.
That office was not authorized for storage of classified documents.
Less than 2 weeks later, on November 14th, the Justice Department started its preliminary review. On December 20th, President Biden's lawyers found the additional classified materials at his Wilmington home. His lawyers also searched his Delaware vacation house. They said no classified records were found there. Former national security official Javed Ali says the matter brings up serious questions about how Mr. Biden and his team handled classified material.
As a former intelligence professional, we were all indoctrinated to never leave our offices with any classified material whatsoever. I mean, that's the whole point of the work.
Garland has now appointed 2 special counsels in 2 months to investigate the handling of sensitive materials by the sitting president and former President Trump, who had over 300 classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate. Today, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy questioned Biden's transparency.
They knew this has happened to President Biden before the election, but they kept it a secret from the American public. Now we find another location that it's at.
The president's lawyers say they have immediately turned over every classified document they have found. Now, this preliminary inquiry moved very quickly, and we have learned that investigators interviewed some of President Biden's aides from his time as vice president. And John, FBI agents have been on the case for almost 2 months.
Adriana Diaz in Washington with the fast-moving events. Thank you, Adriana. David Weinstein now joins me for more. He's a former federal prosecutor and a partner at Jones Walker Law Firm. So, David, let's start out. What will the special counsel do, and what is President Biden's exposure here?
Well, John, the first thing the special counsel is going to do is he is going to start from scratch. He's going to look at this as if no one had looked at it before. He will gather the materials together. He will decide who needs to be interviewed, and he will send people out to ask some questions. In terms of exposure to the president, we're talking about unlawful removal and retention of these documents and nothing else, much different than the allegations against former President Trump. So that's what he'll be looking into to determine whether they were unauthorized to have been removed and then retained by the president at a time when he was the vice president. And the key will be, as it is in the other case, proving intent. Did he know that these documents had been removed? And then when he found them, he gave them back. So what was the length of this period of unauthorized retention, and was it intentional?
Is it significant in your mind that the U.S. attorney who was looking at this before, John Lausch, who that he recommended a special counsel? Does that suggest he sees something?
I don't think it suggests that it sees anything there. I think it simply suggests that he wants to make sure that whoever handles this is viewed as fair and impartial. Remember, he is a U.S. attorney sitting at the pleasure of the president, and now they've appointed someone who is a special counsel who's not in place as a U.S. attorney. I think it's another layer of protection here to ensure that whatever review takes place is fair and impartial.
You mentioned before that this is distinguished. One of the many ways it's distinguished from the situation with former President Trump at Mar-a-Lago is that the Biden team turned over the documents. Now, when the Attorney General gave the timeline, it seems that the White House was not forthcoming with the press about what they had turned over when. Now, that's different. That may be politically foolish, but it's not illegal. So I have two questions for you. One is, would lawyers in the White House have told the political folks, hey, only talk about a limited amount of things. You don't have to talk about everything. Is there some legal reason they would have done that? And then the second question connected with that is, do you expect the special counsel to look into whether the president, what he knew and when he knew it about these documents, just as a kind of ticking every box that you would do, since you said he's starting from scratch?
I'll take your second question first. It's much easier to answer. Yes, he'll attempt to inquire of the president certain questions and certain information. The president has counsel. He will allow him perhaps to answer those questions. And you're right, it's to tick off every box. As to the beginning part, they're certainly restricted to facts. And at the time that these documents were uncovered, November the 2nd, they turned them back over to the National Archives, to law enforcement. And then within 12 days or so, a sitting U.S. attorney was in looking at what was going on. It's not really the White House place to be announcing to the public what's there. It's up to the Department of Justice to decide whether or not they're going to make an announcement about what was found. And at that point in time, if there was nothing that was found that pointed to some sort of unlawful allegations, it's really not appropriate to say anything. Now they've found what's going on and they're making a comment.
The Attorney General is supposed to be independent from the president. Give me your assessment of Attorney General Garland's efforts relative to the recent history of that norm of separation.
He's doing everything in his power to keep himself separate and apart from this. He's appointing people who, if you look at the history of their careers, these are people who were put in place by the former administration. He's not putting people in place that are part of the current administration. He's doing everything he can to distance himself from these ongoing investigations so no one can turn around and point the finger at the current administration and say, you're fixing something. You've got your thumb on the scale trying to influence. He's going to listen to what these people have to say. Granted, he will make the final determination, but he's doing everything he can to make it appear to the American public and everyone around the world who's looking in that both of these investigations are fair and impartial. And in the end, the truth will come out.
All right, David Weinstein, it's very good to have you back. Thanks for helping us with this.
You're welcome, John.